Our reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes sun rise on evil and on the good. He sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of Scripture. You may be seated. When I listen to this Scripture, usually what winds up coming into my mind has something to do with violence and what Christians are supposed to be doing with violence. So it might be translated somewhere along the lines of, you've heard it said that turnabout is fair play. Or you've heard it said that all is fair in love and war. Or you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth leaves the world blind and toothless. But I say, take the final punch. It is a truth that every fight, from a kindergarten fist fight on the playground to international warfare, every fight ends when someone agrees to take the final punch. Sometimes they have to, sometimes they want to. But every fight ends when someone agrees not to punch back when they're hit. That doesn't always mean you lose. You can think of things like the Civil Rights Movement or Gandhi, where they didn't punch back and wound up winning. But the fight ends when someone doesn't punch back. Now, all that is true, but unfortunately, it doesn't quite capture the radicalness of what Jesus says in the midst of these passages. I say unfortunate because I would like to sugarcoat it, and I would like to make it comfortable for me as a pastor. I would like to make it comfortable for you all, but I can't. You see, the fact is that Jesus makes it far more radical than just talking about violence in the Gospel of Matthew, because he adds the word right. Luke just says when they slap you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. But in Matthew, they specifically say when they slap you on the right cheek. Now, you have to think about this for a minute. Most people would have been right-handed. And so if you're wanting to do violence in a slap, you're going to rear back and you're going to slap them across the face, and that's going to hit the left side. If you're hitting the right side, it is a backhand motion that is not meant to hurt. A backhanded slap is fast, and it is almost always meant to insult. What Jesus is talking about is saying, if someone insults you, turn around and let them do it again. That's pretty radical. And it goes on in the next two, when he talks about if someone sues you for your coat, give your cloak also. That's kind of lost some meaning over the years, because a cloak was your bedtime garment. It is what kept you warm at night. And by law, no one could take your cloak. They could sue you for everything you have. They could make you sell yourself into slavery, but they could not take your cloak. You had a right to be warm at night. With the Roman soldiers as well, when the occupying forces say to carry their things for a mile, that is the legal limit they could do. The Roman soldiers' equipment weighed like some 80 pounds. And so the most they could ask you to carry it was 1 mile. By Jesus saying, give your cloak, by Jesus saying, go another mile, he is saying basically give up your rights if someone is insulting you. That is radical stuff. It would be, in essence, back to the violence thing, it would be, in essence, of take the beating and then when it's done, go bandage the other guy's wounds for hitting you. It's radical, and it's not meant to be comfortable, I think. If you're squirming in your seats, that's fine. I'm going to give you permission to squirm in your pews today. No, I'm squirming in the pulpit, and I was squirming as I was reading it this week. But the fact of the matter is, it is evidence of your citizenship. If you truly are a citizen of the kingdom and a visitor on earth, then that means that you really don't care if you get shamed here on earth. You really don't care if you get beat up here on earth. You really don't care if someone insults you or takes away your rights, because you're just a visitor here anyway. And what really matters is what happens in the kingdom. I think it's most on display in the last line of the first bit, which is when Jesus talks about beggars. When he says, if someone begs from you, you give to them. If someone asks you for something, asks you for a loan, you give it. Now, there is a limit to that. I'll get back to that here in a moment. But the number one argument that I usually hear when I talk about, giving to beggars no matter what is, well, I don't know what they're going to do with that money. I call this the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon's money argument, and I've never quite bought it. The largest I've ever seen of this, and so the most, what I would consider outlandish I've ever seen from this, came from one famous person. I don't think it was anyone in Quinter or Grinnell, though some of you may have shared this on Facebook, I don't know. But it went something like this. This person disagreed with abortion. I'm not saying abortion good or bad here, but this person thought abortion was bad. And the person said, I'm never shopping at Starbucks ever again, because Starbucks donates to this charity. I forget what the charity name was, but Starbucks donates to this charity, and that charity gives to a bunch of organizations, but one of the ones it gives to is Planned Parenthood. And while Planned Parenthood does a lot of things, one of the things Planned Parenthood does is abortions, and I don't want to fund abortions, so therefore I'm not going to shop at Starbucks. So the argument basically goes, I'm going to spend $2 on a cup of coffee, and maybe Starbucks will take 10 cents of that $2 and give it to this charity, and maybe that charity will take a nickel of that dime and give it to Planned Parenthood, and maybe Planned Parenthood will take a penny out of that nickel and actually have it go to an abortion. And risk of that, I don't want to fund an abortion. Well, you didn't. You bought a cup of coffee. And it ends there. That's the extent of it. If Starbucks wants to do something, or that charity wants to do something, that's on them. You bought a cup of coffee. Now, if you don't want to support a business that gives to that charity, that's a different story, but you don't think you're funding abortion. And that kind of goes along those same lines, even when it's only one step. If that beggar takes your $5 and he uses it to buy food, wonderful. If that beggar takes your $5 and she uses it to buy beer, that's not on you. Jesus never asks, what did the beggar do with your money? He says, someone came and begged of you. Did you give? Now, this next example I want to caution as well, and so I'm doing that a lot, I know, but I don't ever want to speak ill of my colleagues. So I'm going to preface this by saying this particular person is a wonderful human being who I like. I'm going to argue against what she said, and there is a difference, and I want to make that clear. But one of my pastor friends stood up and preached a sermon, and I was in the congregation at that moment. Some of you were as well, and that may tell you who this was. But one of my pastor friends got up here, and she said with pride in her voice, when someone comes into my town wanting help, let's say they come into town wanting a tank of gas, I will meet them, I will greet them, I will take them to lunch, and I will listen to their story. And what it basically boiled down to was I will decide if they are worthy of being helped, or if they really need help, or if they can do it on their own. I don't agree that that's where we're going. My heart broke when I heard that, because I looked back to the Ministerial Alliance people that have come in, and I get called all the time, well, not all the time, but I get called quite often of people down at Sinclair or at Cobblestone or at Alta, and they need a tank of gas, or they need some food, or they need some clothing, or whatever it is. And when I come down there, I have heard people tell me the truth, I believe, twice in 2.5 years. Every other time, they lie to me. And I know they're lying to me because it's one of those too good to be true type things. It always sounds the same. They're the most faithful person on the face of the planet. They have never missed a Sunday worship in their lives, even if they need help on Sunday. They've never missed a Sunday worship in their lives. They're the most faithful person, and there's lots of Jesus cliches. There's times where I think I'm talking to Ricky Bobby from Ricky Bobby's movie. It's just laid on thick. And they do it because they think they have to prove to me that they're worthy of the church's mercy. Now, there is a point at which we can no longer help. There is a point at which you have to be frugal with the church's money. You know, if they came in wanting $100 worth of gas, I might give them 20. You know, there is a point, but I know that I, nor you, nor they, nor any other person on the face of the planet has ever earned God's mercy. And it pains me, it breaks my heart, that they think they have to earn the churches. We're supposed to be a reflection of God's love. What does it mean when they think they have to earn ours? It is, as I saw in this survey, and the survey was on millennials, but I don't think it's a millennial thing. The millennials, a majority of millennials like Jesus. They like what they read in the Gospels. They want to follow Jesus, but a majority of millennials have negative opinions on the church. And that, I don't think, is something that is a good thing. And I think it tells us a little bit. Back to perhaps a more positive example of what I'm talking about. I believe I have been told the truth twice, and one of those times stands out in my mind. It was a group of 4 men that were driving down the road, and they ran into some car trouble between Quinter and Grainfield. They were on their way to California, they said. And this group, I'm going to describe them as best I can with the most flattering language I can. They were hippies. I mean, that's about as flattering as I can do. That's what they were. And their one person who had a driver's license had some medical complications that either came from the car trouble or caused the car trouble. I don't know. But they needed minor repairs on their car, and their friend was in the hospital for a couple of days, and so they needed a place for the other 3 men and the 2 dogs to stay. And so we put them up at one of the hotels that we had, and we repaired their car. We didn't pay for the hospital bills. Again, at some point you have to draw a line. But we put them up for a couple of days, and we were kind to them, and their friend got better, and we drove them down to Grainfield. They picked up the car, and on they went to California to participate in the fruit harvest. Now, I know that Jesus, when he's talking in this passage, is not worrying at all about the recipient of love. This entire passage is about the Christian giving the love. It is nothing about the recipient. But I still like to think that maybe we planted some seeds in there. And that maybe at some point one or all of those 4 men will look around him and say, you know, I'm getting no love, I'm getting no joy from this life with the drugs and the nomads and never having any money and only having one person with a driver's license. I'm not getting any joy out of this. What did that 20-something-year-old guy in Kansas have? How did he have that joy and that stability? And what did he have, and how can I get it? I'd like to think, even though it's not the point of giving it out, I'd like to think it had a purpose. Even though the point here is about living the gospel. As Jesus says at the end of the passage, it is about being perfect like God is perfect. Now, we as Methodists believe that you can be perfect like God is perfect in this life, that is possible in our striving goal, even though most people won't achieve it. We believe it is possible, but that is the goal. It's about living the gospel and being God in the midst of the life, about being that citizen of the kingdom. And if you are a citizen of the kingdom, then you're not worrying about the insults, you're not worrying about the shame because you were a visitor here anyway. It's not about evangelism, but it does evangelize. It's closer to what James talks about when he talks about faith and works. James says that works don't save you, faith saves you, but if you have faith, you're going to have works. And if you don't have works, then you had no faith. This is that idea. If you are a citizen of the kingdom, then you're not going to care about being taken advantage of. And that's the fact of the matter. I'm fully aware that in the Ministerial Alliance, when I go out and give those tanks of gas, I know that there are people who get that who don't deserve it. I know there are people who get that who either make more money than I do on a given year, or they have it, they didn't really need help, or maybe they were just kind of stupid. There was one that said, well, we had enough money, but then we had a tire blowout, and now we don't have enough money. Well, then you probably shouldn't have gone on that trip, right? I know there are people who don't deserve it, but we give anyway. If you aren't being taken advantage of, then you probably didn't give enough. If people don't think that they can come to you and maybe get some help when maybe they shouldn't deserve it, then you probably weren't giving enough. It's that beatitude just a few verses earlier, blessed are you if you're persecuted for my name's sake. You need to get that way. You need to be giving without thought of reward, loaning without thought of whether they can pay it back. Because if, to paraphrase Jesus, if you only give to those who could pay you back, what good is that? Even the non-believers do that. You should be standing out and love unconditionally. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that this does not make sense. I'm not trying to pretend it does. It's not supposed to make sense. Making sense is a worldly idea. It's not going to make sense. But what I will tell you, and the only comfort I can give you, is that Jesus tells us that when we give to the least of these, when we give to those who are poor and most deserving or most undeserving or whatever you want to call it, when we give to the least of these, that's where Jesus is. He says that's when we've given to Jesus, when we've entertained angels unaware. So even though the world will scoff at you, and even though it won't make sense, and even though everything about your survival instinct will be telling you not to do this, you will be near Jesus. And hopefully that's a little bit of comfort. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to God. Amen.